This is the podcast overview for week 7. We will be covering chapter 7, which is on substance use and abuse. So here is your to-do list for the week. Notice that we're covering chapter 7 in the main textbook, Serafino and Smith, and we're also covering chapter 7 in the Longevity Project, which deals with parental divorce and its effects long term. And then you're also reading physiological module number 4 on the respiratory system, which is in chapter 2. So you're reading only that portion on the respiratory system in chapter 2. And we cover the respiratory system during this week because it goes along well with chapter 7, substance use and abuse, mainly because one of the key things we talk about in substance use is tobacco use, which greatly affects our respiratory system. So that's where we sort of reserve discussion for that. You can listen to the podcast overview of the objectives for chapter 7. It looks like this got cut off, but it says objectives for module 4 here. Again, you're really wanting to understand, and I'll say this in the overview, but just to reiterate, you're wanting to understand the effects of substance use on the respiratory system. So on breathing, on disorders that affect the lungs, and then how the respiratory system works with other systems of the body, like the nervous system, the cardiovascular system, the endocrine system, any of the ones that we've discussed, how it works together with those in fighting off illness, or how it might trigger illness if affected in other systems as well. So make sure you take a look at the objectives before you dive into reading the chapter. Your lecture slides are here that go along with the chapter. This week's discussion is on parental divorce. And really in here is where you kind of have to tweak the assessment this week. So the chapter assessment or the questionnaire deals with divorce. And so for this assessment, you could always choose to do it on someone else if your parents are not divorced. So if your parents are divorced, you're going to want to do the assessment on them. If they're still together, yay. Maybe find another relative who has been divorced, or a friend's parents, and do the assessment on them. Scoring them, not yourself, according to the instructions following, and then discussing it by interpreting the score. Then you're going to be looking at what are the links in the Terman data between parental divorce and longevity. So when we talk about the effects of parental divorce long term, what are they? And you'll see as the Terman children became adults, the ways in which they were affected by their parents having been divorced. And then also the role that personality factors into that, because depending upon one of the termites' personalities, that might affect how they take the divorce. So it might not necessarily be the divorce per se that can negatively affect children, but the personality of the child might be dependent on then how they take divorce, right? Or divorce is dependent on the personality of the child. So some children are more resilient than others. We know from research all around that divorce affects kids negatively, even if they don't cognitively think that it does. There's overwhelming amount of evidence to show that it does in various ways. More so it affects the woman in the divorce, and then affects the children inadvertently. But there are a lot of moderators going on here. So there's not necessarily a direct connection between divorce and long-term results. There's a lot of other things that kind of get in the way and get intertwined there. If your parents are divorced, here's where you can speak to how it's affected you. Okay, so you could talk about that a little bit. And if not, you can talk about how it affected the people that you interviewed or did the assessment on. So that's the chapter this week. There might not be a ton of overlap with this week's chapter in Serafino and Smith, but previous chapters, absolutely, like coping. So you can go back to some of the earlier chapters in Serafino and Smith and pull out some ties and some connections to this chapter here in the Longevity Project in order to kind of fit those in. And then lastly, you have your second exam. It's due by Sunday the 18th. It's going to cover chapters 5, 6, and 7, along with the physiological module on the respiratory system, number 4. Again, 50 minutes to complete the exam, 50 questions, and the exam is closed notes and closed text. I think I might also stick in here some tips on multiple choice test taking. I'll probably insert those right in before the exam here. You'll find them in here. I meant to do that earlier, but I have just some resources, some tips on how best to attack a multiple choice question test. And before you assume that you already know all that, I would take a peek at it because a lot of students struggle with multiple choice, not because you don't necessarily know the information, but you might not know it well enough to distinguish minute differences. You know, when something's slightly different than another thing. And there's ways you can get better at that, how you're reading the question and how you're working through the answers can, you know, all be helped by a little bit of practice. So I'll stick those in there. I think that will help you this week. But of course, again, if you have questions as you're working through this material, please let me know. If you'd like to Zoom for office hours, please let me know. I am available. Thanks, everyone.